Jordi García-Ojalvo obtained his PhD at the Universitat of Barcelona in 1995. He did postdoc work at Georgia Institute of Technology and at the Humboldt University of Berlin. He began working in the field of system biology in 2003 as a visiting professor at Cornell University. From there, he became a full professor at the Universitat Politècnica de Catalunya in 2008. Finally, he became a full professor at the Universitat Pompeu Fabra in 2012, where he now leads his research group. Okay, so thank you very much, Jordi, for the talk this morning. So we have prepared some questions for this interview, and so we wanted to start with your background. Did you ever see yourself doing something different from physics or biophysics?
I think it, like everybody, mostly. The professors that you have in high school determine a lot what's going on and the way that they teach you. And for instance, biology was very memoristic. You had to remember a lot of things, but there was not so much thinking. So I didn't even consider to study biology. And physics was challenging because you had all these problems to solve, and you had to think rationally. So that's why I chose. It was later, I think it was between the first and the second postdocs, that you go to some place and then you see other groups, and then you start thinking, oh, this would be a place. Biology maybe is an area where you have also interesting problems, like the ones that you have in physics, so to say. And you can apply your tools that you learn in physics to do biology. So this is when I started. So
can you share with us the key steps during your career which took you where you are right now?
Okay. The first key step is choosing to do a PhD thesis in statistical physics. And in that particular moment, I already started studying stochastic processes, non-equilibrium phenomena, and noise. And naturally, after the thesis, then noise appears as a very natural question to study in biology. First of all, in neuronal systems, for instance. I was interested, well, if you want, my first postdoc, I was a postdoc on lasers, and there I was interested in noise in lasers. And to be honest, I chose that topic because I started working here as a professor in a group that was studying lasers. So I wanted to mix what I wanted to do in that group, namely lasers, with what I had done in my PhD, namely noise. So I did my postdoc in that area, and there were a lot of groups working on nonlinear dynamics in that department. This was in Georgia Tech in Atlanta. This was the time in which chaos theory was still on its heyday, more or less. So then dynamical systems was super interesting. So then I brought this with me. And there are interesting dynamical phenomena such as excitable dynamics, which is what neurons have. And this is my entry into biology.
With your experience, having worked in several fields, which are the biggest challenges and most rewarding aspects of being a scientist?
It's basically the curiosity aspect. I mean, it's just seeing something and then wondering, wow, how does this happen? This is for me trying to answer this question. And that is why nowadays, this is for me. I mean, I know that many other scientists don't work that way, but for me, everything starts with an observation, and therefore, I try to stay very close to experimental results. It's the most exciting thing is when an experimental colleague or us in the lab sees something that is, this type of thing. Oh, that's interesting. Why does it happen? That is, and then the entire process of trying to understand why this happens. This is the most, for me, the process is the most interesting. Mm-hmm. The back and forth in trying to establish hypotheses and test them, and using math and models.
So solving this curiosity would be the most rewarding, and
satisfying the curiosity.
And the most challenging?
Well, it's also the most challenging. It's to really find the balance between having an interesting problem theoretically that also is helpful to understand reality.
So now I want to delve deeper into the science you work in. Mm-hmm. So I'm an experimentalist, and for me I would say that for some people biology can mostly be considered as an empirical science. So how would you define theoretical biology?
Of course, if you consider biology as a purely empirical science, it doesn't make much sense, no, to talk about theoretical biology. But I think as a physicist, this is addressed to physicists in principle. So my argument, my way of thinking is that we physicists, what we do is we apply mathematics to understand the world. And the assumption is that the world is understandable. And we do it with non-living matter all the time. And there we have no problem in saying, no, I have these laws, either quantum laws or still classical laws, I don't know, or statistical physics models or whatever you want, and they are going to explain what I observe. I do think that the same thing has to be valid also in the case of biology. There is no vis viva. Vitalism is over. So we cannot talk about, there's nothing special, about being alive. I'm very physicalist or materialist or whatever you want to call it. I'm very physicalist in the world. So biology has to be understandable. And this means that there has to be laws, and the laws have to be mathematical. People have been doing theoretical biology for a century, no? Lotcam, Volterra, you establish these models for predator and prey. And these are theoretical models. And in some cases, they explain quite well what happens, especially if you do control experiments so this is for me theoretical biology. But now there is enough knowledge. So I think it is valuable to try to find laws that should be written in a mathematical way, to try to understand the phenomena that living matter exhibit.
Mm-hmm. So connecting this to your talk, how do bacteria do problem solving, and why does this mean that they are living organisms?
I mean, the way that we define life makes it such that any cell, including bacteria, are alive. And now, if you ask me why or how do we know that bacteria are solving problems, is this the question?
See, that's part of the question, and how we can use that to define living organisms, to separate them from non-living organisms, right?
Well, I wouldn't focus necessarily on bacteria, even though I understand what you mean, that bacteria are a good starting point. But I would say it in general, we could say it in bacteria, but any living tissue or any living organism, even a cell or a collection of cells, what they do is they are able to adapt to their environment to survive. So they are able to process information all the time that changes. I don't know, for instance, circadian rhythms, no? Of course you could say. So the environment in which all the organisms on Earth have evolved for billions of years oscillates with a period of 24 hours between light and dark. And as a result, it has been beneficial for all these organisms to develop ways of telling time. But on the other hand, and this is a periodic driving, perfectly periodic driving. No, that's fine. So then these bacteria learn to encode within them the environment in the genome. They encode it in their genome, and there are circuits of genes and proteins that are the ones that are able to the bacteria to tell time. So they are reacting to this environment. They are adapting. But not only this, sometimes this driving is periodic, but it's also quite noisy, because sometimes there are clouds, sometimes there are more or less clouds. The organism is moving into a cave, and there you do not have the light-dark cycle, and still the system is able to perform well, and it's adapting. It's adapting to whatever is happening. So it is this ability to adapt, in my opinion, what defines life.
So focusing on the theoretical aspects of your work, so what kind of systems do you model or simulate, and what tools do you use for these models and simulations?
Okay, going back to this idea that there have to be mechanisms that explain the way that life behaves, that we knowing that a cell contains stores information in the long term in the genome, and then it can read this information in real time and produce proteins. This is the key for the mechanism. So that what do I do? Well, what we do is we try to model these processes by which proteins are produced from the genome, and they are activated by other proteins or by other elements, small molecules or whatever, and they interact with each other in a way that they modify the behavior of the cell. So one of the things that we model or we account for is molecular networks, if you will, the molecular networks inside cells. But then on top of that, if you look at tissues, then you have cells as units the units that interpret the genome and act. So these are agents, and these units are also living together in a tissue, as I was talking in this morning. So then the cells themselves could also be units that you could model. So then you can model molecular networks, you can model, if you will, cellular networks. You can go higher in the scale and model networks of organs, if you will, and you can do physiological modeling. We don't do so much. And regarding tools, one of the main interests of my lab is dynamical systems, as I was telling you. So any kind of tool that enables us to represent the dynamics of the system, we use. This includes ordinary differential equations, partial differential equations, stochastic differential equations, maybe sometimes agent-based modeling, and other kinds of analysis like this, PDs, SDs, DDs, ODs, and ABMs, anyway.
Yeah. So how complex do you allow your systems to be, and do you face any limitations when trying to model?
As I told you, if everything begins trying to understand experimental observation, you have to be constrained by the experimental reality. And that is why it's very important to know what you can assume and what you cannot assume in your model. And not introduce anything that you don't need to, because this is going to add unnecessary complexity and make the parameter space larger. So, these models sometimes have a very large parameter space with many dimensions. Ideally, you would try to keep it as small as possible, and this means making assumptions, but reasonable assumptions.
Mm-hmm. And relating to experiments, is it easy to draw conclusions from your model and simulations and to compare them to the experiments?
It depends. It depends on the particular situation. The best way is just to go back and forth between theory and experiments, and then at some point, with the theory you try to interpret and predict new experiments, and the experiments validate the theory. And well, sometimes it's hard, and then the fact that you cannot do it, that you cannot, how do you call it? The fact that you cannot make the two things agree, the two directions of the loop agree, is an indication that you're not going in the right direction. There is some assumption that you are not making it correct, and sometimes it happens. So how easy it is, it depends. I think that when it becomes easier and easier is because you are closer to something similar to the truth. When it becomes complicated and very involved, I don't think this is a good sign. Because at some point you have to explain another thing I wanted to say. Sometimes happens that you have new facts, new experimental observations. If you have to add a new assumption to explain the new fact, and then you keep doing, this is not sustainable. So the goal is that, okay, you have a new fact, you don't add another assumption, otherwise. So with the same model that you had, that's of course it's obvious, but that's the goal. What we cannot accept is that you have to keep adding assumptions to explain new facts. This indicates that the basal assumptions were wrong.
So the methods that you use, the models and simulations, are they applicable to other fields of physics and other fields in general, like artificial intelligence and neural models?
In physics, this happens all the time. The models that we use are not different from the ones that you can use in other areas. Condensed matter physics, as you were telling me that you're seeing in the lab, you see negative feedbacks. So the models are not different. So they should be directly applicable to other areas in physics or beyond. We have fields such as sociophysics or whatever it's called, that the models are statistical mechanics models and sometimes dynamical systems models. So in principle, these models are applicable to other fields. But now you also talk about AI. And that's a different thing. It's also interesting in itself because, of course, there is an obvious thing. Neural networks that are used in AI are called neural networks because they were inspired by the brain. People have forgotten a little bit this. They still call it neural networks, but the architectures that people have come up with, LSTMs or transformers or all of these things, they are getting away from biology. They still call it neural networks, but this is farther away from the brain. But I still think that what people have, this concept of neural networks, we can bring it back to biology. This is one of the topics that I'm interested in my lab. we can bring this topic back to biology, because I do think that these neural networks, not so sophisticated and so over-engineered as the ones that are powering ChatGPT and all of these other things, not so over-engineered. You have other neural networks that I am convinced that are powering the quote-unquote intelligence of this problem-solving matter. Because if we talk about problem-solving matter, as I was saying this morning, then you could say, oh, if they solve problems, it's intelligence, so I'm going to call it intelligence, quote-unquote. And this intelligence must be powered by something. What? A couple of ODEs. Well, maybe it's something more like a neural network, like the ones that were developed last century, that the computer scientists have taken very nicely, and they have run with them and farther away from biology and for any kind of physical system, to be honest.
So you've already talked about how your research can be used to develop these neural networks and artificial intelligence. Do you think that it can also be, your research can also be used to in other direction, like drug development?
Medicine has advanced a lot over hundreds of years on the basis of correlations, no? So I mean, if you think about it, it's been a success. Medicine has been an amazing success, but it's built on correlations. On you see, oh, if I do this, I see this, and so these two things go together. And to detect correlations, you need data. So now, what does it mean? That the challenges, the clinical challenges that remain, require data, and this data is not so easy to gather. We are, for instance, one of the projects that we have been working on is not so much on developing drugs because it's difficult, and also, but maybe on trying to to find biomarkers. How do you distinguish from the data whether a patient has one type of disease or another, and how is this person going to respond to one therapy or another? This is, of course, a goal, but for that you need data. It's slow. My opinion is that it's slow. I don't know. I don't want to overpromise things.
So this field of biophysics and bioengineering, I think it's a very interdisciplinary field because you work with biologists, physicists, chemists, engineers. So I wanted to ask, are there any special challenges when you have to reach the communication and collaboration between biologists and physicists, but also between experimentalists and theoreticians?
Physics is a bit special in that way because I do think that the separation between experiments and theory, of course, it's clear, and there are experimentalists and theorists, but I think the language and the kind of way of thinking and the problems are the same for both. So in that regard, but then this changes when you go into another discipline. No? What would be let's discuss what is the interplay between theoretical theoretical physicists, if you will, and experimental biologists. And there, the thing is that I think the questions are somewhat different. I mean, it depends also on the person, on the two people in a collaboration, on the multiple people in a collaboration. But in general, on average, the main theoretical physicists and the main experimental biologists, the questions are different. This is what I was saying in my talk. I think physicists, we like to think that there are common principles underlying the different processes, so we are looking for them, and therefore I think we are ready to make assumptions and simplify as much as possible to get to the core. But sometimes in biology, this is not so interesting for them because, it's understandable because they spend a lot of time, effort, money, and thought into trying to come up to identify all the elements and all the processes that underlie some behavior. And every one of the elements and processes are important for them and for the process. But then it's a different type of approach to understanding the world.
Now I want to ask you a final question directed to the people studying in the undergrad, but also graduate students. So what advice would you give to these students that want to pursue a career in science?
I mean, it's easy for me to say anything right now, because the position is very different. I mean, I'm trying to go back to myself when I was studying, and I have to say that maybe I was a bit irresponsible because I was not thinking too long in the long term. And maybe, I don't know, maybe this was irresponsible and maybe I was just lucky. But for me, I think I would just say one has to do what one finds interesting. You have to be passionate, because this work is this task is complicated. No, it's very open-ended. That's one of the things. No, when you're studying in an undergraduate degree, you have your problem set, and the problems are very well defined, and there is a solution. But this is not the case as soon as you start the PhD. The problems are not very well defined. Nobody knows a solution, so it's hard. So the only way to operate, I think, is that maybe be a bit irresponsible and don't think too much in the future, and just do whatever you like, you think this is interesting. I mean, I don't know about, I would like to know your opinion also. Well, maybe when I was your age, I didn't have, but during my career, I just had some calling. It's as if we're talking, I mean, if you think about a dynamical system, you're talking about attractors, no? So it's as if you had an I have seen an attractor. Biology for me was an attractor, and it developed slowly. You were, okay? Over 3, 4, 5 years, I was pulled. I was pulled, and I said, oh, this is interesting. I want to learn more. I want to learn more. So I think this is the way to proceed, because it's so hard, and one never knows what's going to happen. That what you cannot do is you cannot do something just because you think that you will get there. I have to do this even if I don't like it too much. No, I don't think that pays. You have to follow your feelings. But it's easy. It's easy for me to say. Yeah?
Thank you for the talk, but also for sharing with us your experiences and expertise in this interview.
Thank you. Thank you so much, José Antonio. José Antonio. Eh?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.